On cloud or in premise? This is one of the questions that we have to answer here at Enterprise Connect 2018, which is why it's fortunate that I'm sitting next to Mr. Keven McMahon. He is the Director of Segment Marketing at West Unified Communications. Keven, thank you very much for finding the time to speak with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, West has spent a lot of years extolling the virtues of cloud-based communications, which sounded like an oddity back then. Now, not so much, but it does mean that you've been on the forefront for many, many years. Watching the development of both hybrid and pure in-cloud deployments, what trends have you seen over the last few years?
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost is the fact that it's a big world and there's plenty of room for all kinds of deployments, right? There's not a one-size-fits-all approach that makes sense. And most commonly today, what we're seeing really are kind of these hybrid approaches that combine both on-prem and in-cloud solutions, because organizations today are complex. They're wide-ranging, they're covering an awful lot of geography, and they may exist today really as a result of mergers, acquisitions. They may have spun up locations that are away from the mothership. And so they need a lot of flexibility in the infrastructure and architecture that they use. And so it's really important for our clients to look at what their needs are and how to best integrate a particular functionality into a particular location. That's why it's so important to be able to go in both directions.
Now, that needs-based approach is very important when you're considering a deployment, because we both know that there's a fallacy that has gone around for quite a few years that, either I'm all in on cloud or I'm all in on-prem.
Right.
When, as you just mentioned, it's about the needs. It's about what solution are you actually looking for. It's not we all need to rush to the cloud. It's, well, what are you doing, and is it better served by the cloud?
Right.
That being said, what markets do you think are best served by cloud?
You know, it's probably less about markets today than it might have been 8 or 9 years ago, right? In the relatively early days. Today, it's about more about the characteristics of your organization, right? Do you have many locations? Are they spread across multiple countries? Do you have a high percentage of knowledge workers? Are they mobile? What are the contact center requirements that you have, or the functionality related to contact centers? These are all questions that you tease out in your deep dive with your service providers or with the folks that you're working with to really get a sense of what makes sense for you.
Right. One of these markets that it makes sense for is verticals. Because verticals, the idea of auto-provisioning, the idea of persistent authentication, that's very attractive to industries that have vertical markets. But quick question, is there a vertical market that you think is best suited for the type of service that West can provide?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't say best suited for a whole vertical, right? I'm always going to defer to what's best for you. That said, there are some verticals that have moved pretty quickly to not necessarily a cloud-centric, but certainly a cloud-heavy approach. And so we look at industries like professional services, which kind of have all those characteristics that I was talking about earlier, which would include things like financial services, law, consulting. But then we also look at healthcare. There's an industry that very much is a result today of a high degree of mergers, acquisitions, and so there's a high degree of complexity in their UC and their IT stack generally, and they continue to grow. And so there's a case where hosted solutions tend to work better. But again, it all depends on your particular requirement. And most times, I would say outside of being at the SMB end of the marketplace, a hybrid approach is probably going to factor somewhere into your equation.
Yeah. One last question, and this is one of these where I'm a little shocked that I still have to ask it almost 2 decades after we first asked it, and that is about E911. Right. It's been a tricky spot for any cloud deployment. In fact, it's been a tricky spot for VoIP since the beginning of the game. What is it that makes it so difficult, and how does West handle it?
Well, you're right. It's hard because it's hard. It's because it's complex, right? And it's exacerbated by things like IP. And it's multiple locations. You have a single number reach, right? And so there are a lot of factors coming into play. there's not really one thing. But the challenge is, of course, that increasingly it's a requirement. It's something that companies need to do, both for regulatory reasons, but also just for the safety of their folks, right? And that's a responsibility that every organization has. And so, how do you best approach that? There's certainly a high degree of professional services that goes into all this, right? It's not the kind of solution that you're going to be just buying off the shelf. So when you're talking to someone to help with these solutions, it's important to ask a lot of questions and make sure that they've got the bona fides to be able to have a good conversation with you.
Fantastic. We have been speaking with Mr. Keven McMahon. He's the Director of Segment Marketing at West Unified Communication Services. Keven, thank you very much for spending the time. If you could please tell our audience where they can find you, where they can find West, and where they can find more information about what you might be able to do for their next deployment.
Sure, absolutely. Direct everybody to, very simply, west.com. And in particular, relative to E911 services, just released a nice white paper that kind of addresses some of these issues that you're talking about and some of the reasons why E911 is so important today. So check us out, west.com.
Keven, once again, thank you very much. And to you, make sure to click the other videos down in our vidcast series for Enterprise Connect 2018. I'm Father Robert Ballecer, the Digital Jesuit. Stay tabbed.